Hello everybody and welcome back to LRN, the home of F1 news and fan opinion. Today we react to the news that Stoffel Vandoorne will be signing for Aston Martin Racing from 2023 season as the reserve and test driver, and we discuss what that means for Nico Hulkenberg and Mick Schumacher and their futures within Formula 1. And the reason that Stoffel Vandoorne's signing on with Aston Martin has such a profound effect on Haas and their driver decision is that Hulkenberg and Mick Schumacher were considered and understood to be the two main drivers still being considered for the second drive at Haas. Obviously, we had comments from Gunther Steiner saying, Daniel Ricciardo, call me if you're interested. But we've already gone through that in a previous video. Obviously, Ricciardo's given up on his hopes for a drive next year. As part of that, it was understood that he'd actually turned down opportunities at Williams and Haas. He didn't want to drop down that far. So Ricciardo was off the table. So it did leave Mick Schumacher and Nico Hulkenberg as the two drivers truly considered for Haas. And the reason Vandoorne comes into this so massively, is such a big influence on this decision, is because he is coming in as a test and reserve driver for Aston Martin, a role Hulkenberg was filling. And he's doing it already confirmed alongside Felipe Drugovich, who... And given that they therefore have two reserve drivers, there is no need for a third. There's no need for Hulkenberg to continue fulfilling the role that he has been for Aston Martin because they've now got two people already doing it. So from that perspective, it suggests that Hulkenberg already has another role in place, another position within hopefully Formula 1 in place, and it alludes to the fact that Haas have made a decision to bring Hulkenberg in as their driver for the following season. Obviously that is yet to be confirmed, but following the breadcrumb of evidence, it does suggest that Hulkenberg has a better option available to him than continuing as the reserve driver for Aston Martin, because you have to assume that there was no real reason for Hulkenberg to leave that role as reserve driver for Aston Martin unless something better came along. Certainly from Aston Martin's perspective, having Hulkenberg there as the reserve driver is more beneficial than Vandoorne, especially given that when Vandoorne was in Formula 1, it really wasn't very much of a success. And Hulkenberg is a really experienced and respected driver in the past of Formula 1. So certainly he could offer more in terms of his advice, engagement and influence on the team's performance than Vandoorne could, at least from my perspective. So having Hulkenberg at the team would definitely have been more beneficial for Aston Martin. So the fact that he's leaving suggests it's more beneficial for Hulkenberg that he's moving on from his position at the team. And you have to couple that with how Haas have been basically trying to do everything they can to find a better option than Mick Schumacher. They've left the door open for Mick, and they've said, look, if he can be phenomenal in the final races of the season, then absolutely he's obviously in our decision process. He's one of the drivers that we're looking at, but he needs to do a lot. And one of the reasons, I'll bring you back to comments made by Gene Haas only just last month, where he basically came out and said that Schumacher is basically too expensive to remain in the Haas car. So comments from Gene Haas were, in this sport, being kind of a rookie driver, the sport just doesn't allow it. It's just too expensive. If you make any mistakes in driver selection, strategy or tyre selection, it's costing you millions of dollars. I think Mick has got a lot of potential, but he costs a fortune and he's wrecked a lot of cars that have cost us a lot of money that we just don't have. Now, if you bring us some points and you are Verstappen and you wreck cars, we'll deal with it. But when you're in the back and you wreck cars, that's very difficult. So then asked if Schumacher has the full final 4 races to prove himself to the Haas team owner, he said, well, if he wins the next one, he's in. Somewhere in between there is a grey area, which is essentially no other agreement was in place prior to the final 4 races of the season. So Mick did have an opportunity to go out there and just put on an absolutely mad performance that would give them no choice but to bring him back and sign him up for another season at the team. That obviously hasn't happened to date. Based on his performances, and essentially what they're saying is he crashes too much, and Haas, given the team that they are, the budget that they have, they simply cannot afford to keep fixing the car, paying for replacement parts. And I do take some issue with this. I think Obviously, of the two drivers, Mick Schumacher is the younger driver. He's got more of a future in the sport, or at least he could have more of a future in the sport. And I think he has much improved. I do think, obviously, when he was with Mazepin, he was just massively outperforming him. But that was mainly because Mazepin was absolutely useless. But obviously, with Magnussen coming back, he very quickly showed that Mick wasn't maybe doing as well as we thought he was because of the performance differentiation between him and Mazepin. And Magnussen came in, again, a steady pair of hands, hasn't done much wrong, been very consistent, and you can see why Haas, given their budget and the state of their team, the size of their team, would want another driver like Magnussen who could come back in and offer them consistency, offer them reliability in terms of finishing races, not having too many incidents, not having to learn on the job. And then maybe when Haas get somewhere with their car, where it is, performing, they're maybe consistently in the top half, then they could maybe look to bring in a younger driver who can offer them more points, or offer them a bit more of a maverick kind of driver who might have a few more incidents, but overall will bring in more points and add something more to the team. But I think at the moment, clearly the focus is saving money and bringing in a driver who is reliable and will do the job. And I think Hulkenberg fits that mold perfectly. I think he's obviously very experienced in the sport. He obviously has been a consistent point scorer throughout his career. He averages, I think, 2.3 points per race that he's ever been in. He's obviously, his best race finishes were fourth, where I think he finished fourth 3 times in his career. Had the 1 pole position, obviously famous for not having finished on the podium given the amount of races that he's been in, but he's never had a front running car. He's never had the opportunity to be in a true challenging at the front car. So to have the record that he does, I think is genuinely impressive. And he's always been consistent, never the best, but always good, always a solid driver, well liked as well by the fans, by people around F1. I think he's generally always been well liked. So you can see why Haas want to bring him into the team. My only issue, of course, is a very short-term option. Hulkenberg's not at the beginning of his career anymore. He will... there is going to come a point sooner rather than later, if they make a move for Hulkenberg, that they're going to need to look for another replacement. And again, I guess at that stage they can evaluate and maybe look at a younger driver who has a few years under their belt and has proven to be a consistent performer, maybe more so than what they believe Mick Schumacher to be at this stage of his career. But certainly you can see why they're interested in Hulkenberg. My personal view is I would like to see Mick Schumacher continue in the role. I think that Haas obviously put up with Grosjean crashing the car constantly, and they managed to find a way to fund his nonsense. So I've struggled to think that, Mick isn't more accident prone than Grosjean was, so they clearly can deal with that situation when it arises, but maybe those years of having to deal with Grosjean has soured them to having to again put up with a driver who is taking up so much of their budget, especially in the budget, cost cap area where, that didn't actually apply during Grosjean's stay. So maybe I'm being unfair because obviously the budget, the cost cap now does impact how much money they have to spend. So it certainly is probably impacting them more now with Mick than it did with Grosjean, even though Grosjean probably crashed more and cost them actually more money than what Schumacher is, at least from what I can work out. So maybe that comes into it as well in terms of the cost cap. But generally speaking, I can see where they're coming from. I can see why they want Hulk, and I would be happy to see Hulk back in the sport. But I'd also be sad to see Schumacher fall out of the sport, because I think he's got something to give. I think he's got more levels to go, and I'd like to see him given that opportunity. Maybe he ends up with a reserve role. Maybe like Danny Rick, he ends up taking a year out and coming back and looking at opportunities. Again, though, like Danny Rick, I'm struggling to see where those opportunities are going to lie. I think with both drivers, or with any driver, when you leave F1, it's very difficult to come back. Unless you're someone like Alonso, who, when he declares he's coming back, every team is thinking, can we get him? Is there space for him? Because he is that good. I think, obviously, Hulk and Mick are a level below that. They're not the kind of names. And with Ricciardo as well, a level below Alonso, especially at the moment. Where they are not the kind of name where you're going to go, we have to get them in our team, like an Alonso. It's very much a, we'll look at them, we'll consider them, we'll weigh them up against other opportunities, and maybe you'll get the drive. We can't guarantee that at this stage, and then maybe that's why Haas have taken so long to come to a final decision. But with this announcement that Vandoorne is going to Aston Martin, it does appear, or at least it makes sense that Haas have made a decision that Hulk is going to be their driver, and it makes sense that Hulkenberg has therefore agreed to move on to another role, and that's why Aston Martin have moved to bring Vandoorne in. We of course don't have confirmation of this officially yet, so hopefully over the next few days we'll see something. We'll have an announcement that confirms from Haas who their driver is going to be for next season, and I will be very surprised if it turns out to be Mick Schumacher, because essentially that puts Hulkenberg completely out of Formula One. So unless he's secured a drive in another formula, Hulkenberg in IndyCar or something, I just don't understand why that would happen. So definitely something to look out for. Also, congratulations to Vandoorne for getting the position at Aston Martin, obviously leaving Mercedes and going off to Aston Martin. For him, maybe that's got a brighter future for him in terms of opportunities down the line. Not desperate to see Vandoorne back in F1. I think it's not his level. But test driver, reserve driver, yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, Formula E seemed to fit Vandoorne better overall in Formula One than Formula One. But Hulkenberg for sure. Let's see him. If Mick really isn't going to be given another opportunity, then absolutely looking forward to Hulkenberg being back in the sport. Looking forward to seeing what he can do. But most of all, I just think he's a good guy to have around the paddock. He always gives a good interview. He's just a really good guy, and as I say, respected throughout the world of F1. So if it is to be Hulkenberg who joins Haas, then I'm all for it. And good luck to him next season. But let me know in the comments below. Do you think Hulkenberg's a good decision for Haas? Would you prefer to see Mick Schumacher given another season to continue his growth in Formula One? Or is there another driver, a third party? And we've discussed Giovinazzi in the past. I'm surprised that he's kind of gone away in terms of the talk about him joining the team. Because I did think with that Ferrari link between Haas and Giovinazzi that maybe he'd get another chance in the sport. But at the moment, it doesn't sound like that's to be the case. But maybe it is. Maybe in the background, it is actually still discussions going on and Giovinazzi's being considered for a role somewhere. But as I say, no real strong hints that that's the case. It does very much sound like it was a toss-up between Hulkenberg and Schumacher. And it seems like Hulkenberg has won that battle. So let me know in the comments below. Who would you pick if you were Gene Haas, if you were Gunther Steiner? Would you be going for Mick Schumacher? Would you be going for Hulkenberg? Or is there someone else that you would be getting? Realistically, of course, you might go and say Daniel Ricciardo, but of course we know he doesn't want to go for that drive. So realistically, who would you be going for Haas? Who do you want to see in that second Haas seat next season and maybe a couple years after that as well? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, that's been my reaction to the news that Vandoorne is signing for Aston Martin and what that means for Hulkenberg and Schumacher respectively. As I say, if you are new around here, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit a like on the video if you did enjoy it. And let me know your thoughts in the comments. Otherwise, I'll just thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day. Goodbye.